Look closely at your life for a moment. Not the story you tell yourself about your life, but the raw experience of it. The quiet fact beneath every moment. If you observe carefully, you will notice something almost unsettling. Nothing stays the same for very long. The breath you just took has already disappeared. The moment you were living in 5 seconds ago is gone forever. Even the body you are sitting in right now is not the same body you had 10 years ago, or even 10 days ago. Cells are dying and being replaced. Thoughts arise and vanish. Feelings surge and dissolve like waves against the shore. Everything is already changing. And yet, despite how obvious this truth is, the human mind spends an enormous amount of energy trying to deny it. We try to hold on to youth as if aging were a mistake. We try to freeze relationships as if love could remain exactly the same forever. We chase success and security as if stability could be permanently achieved. We build identities, careers, reputations, homes, and entire civilizations around the silent hope that something, anything, might finally stay fixed. But the world does not cooperate with this hope. The body ages. Seasons turn. Friends drift apart. Children grow up. Buildings decay. Memories fade. Entire cultures rise and fall like waves in the ocean of time. Even the most powerful empires that once seemed eternal now exist only in fragments of stone and faded pages of history. Still, the mind whispers, maybe my life will be different. This quiet resistance to change is so deeply ingrained in us that we rarely even notice it. Yet it lies beneath much of the stress, anxiety, and disappointment that shape our lives. Because when reality inevitably shifts, as it always does, the mind feels betrayed. We say things like, "This shouldn't be happening." We feel shock when relationships change, when careers collapse, when our bodies grow older, when plans dissolve. But the truth is that nothing has gone wrong. Life has simply continued to do what it has always done. It has continued to change. In the ancient teachings of Buddhism, this fundamental characteristic of existence is called impermanence, or anicca. It is not merely a philosophical idea. It is not a belief that we adopt or reject. It is a description of reality as it actually unfolds, moment by moment. Everything that arises will eventually pass away. Every sensation, every emotion, every possession, every relationship, every identity. Even the thoughts we are thinking right now are already dissolving as new ones take their place. And yet the mind insists on building a life around the illusion of permanence. We cling to the pleasant moments, hoping they will last. We resist the painful ones, hoping they will disappear quickly. We try to secure the future, preserve the present, and rewrite the past. But this endless struggle is like trying to hold water in a clenched fist. The tighter we grip, the faster it slips away. What makes this especially tragic is that impermanence itself is not the source of our suffering. The seasons changing are not a problem. The body aging is not a mistake. Relationships evolving are not a failure of life. The real problem begins the moment we demand that things remain the way they were. Imagine standing beside a river and shouting at the water to stop flowing. No matter how loudly you protest, the river continues moving. The frustration comes not from the river itself, but from the insistence that it should behave differently. In the same way, life is a river of continuous change. Every moment is moving forward, dissolving into the next. The present moment is never frozen. It is always unfolding, transforming, vanishing. And yet, we often live as though permanence were possible. We say, if I can just reach this goal, then everything will finally settle down. If I can just secure enough money, then life will be stable. If I can just hold on to this relationship, this feeling, this success, then happiness will stay. But even the most beautiful moments are temporary visitors. A joyful evening with friends eventually ends. A breathtaking sunset slowly fades into darkness. The child we hold in our arms grows older and walks away into their own life. Every experience, no matter how precious, eventually slips into memory. This is not a failure of life. This is life functioning exactly as it must. Without change, nothing could grow. Without endings, nothing new could begin. The very possibility of movement, transformation, and evolution depends entirely on impermanence. Yet the mind struggles against this truth because it feels threatening to the sense of self we have constructed. If everything is changing, then what can we truly hold on to? If everything fades, then what can we rely on? These questions can feel unsettling at first. They shake the foundation of the stories we have built about control, certainty, and permanence. But they also open the door to a deeper understanding of reality. Because when we begin to see impermanence clearly, not as an abstract theory, but as a living truth, we also begin to see something else. Much of our suffering does not come from change itself. It comes from the quiet, relentless demand that change should not happen. The mind wants stability in a universe that is fluid. It wants permanence in a world that is dissolving. It wants certainty in a process that is endlessly unfolding. And this mismatch between expectation and reality creates tension in the heart. The Buddha once pointed out that clinging to what cannot last is like grasping a burning coal with the intention of throwing it at someone else. We are the ones who get burned first. In the same way, every attempt to hold life still creates friction. We cling to youth and fear aging. We cling to comfort and resist loss. We cling to identity and fear change. But the river of existence continues flowing, whether we resist it or not. So the question is not whether change will occur. Change is already happening. The real question is whether we are willing to see it. Because the moment we truly recognize that everything is in motion, something remarkable begins to shift in the way we relate to life. The illusion that things should stay the same begins to soften. The rigid grip of expectation loosens slightly. And in that small opening, a new possibility emerges. What if impermanence is not the tragedy we thought it was? What if the constant dissolving of things is not a flaw in the design of existence, but part of its hidden wisdom? At first, this idea may seem strange. After all, decay, loss, and change are often framed as enemies of happiness. We are taught to fight them, delay them, or ignore them as long as possible. But what if the very thing we are trying to escape is actually the source of a deeper freedom? What if the truth we fear, the truth that everything is already changing, is not something to mourn, but something to understand? Because once we begin to see the world through the lens of impermanence, an entirely different relationship with life becomes possible. And this is where our exploration truly begins. If impermanence is such an obvious feature of life, then an interesting question arises. Why does it frighten us so deeply? After all, change surrounds us from the moment we are born. A child grows taller, the seasons rotate endlessly, the sun rises and sets every single day. On the surface, impermanence is everywhere, constantly visible. And yet, when change touches the things we care about most, our bodies, our relationships, our sense of identity, it suddenly feels disturbing. Even threatening. Why? To understand this, we must look carefully at the structure of the human mind. Deep inside, the mind is designed to search for stability. For most of human history, survival depended on recognizing patterns that could be trusted. A safe shelter, a reliable food source, a familiar tribe, these were essential for staying alive. The brain evolved to cling to what felt predictable because predictability meant safety. Over time, this instinct did not disappear. It simply expanded beyond survival and began shaping the way we interpret our entire lives. We seek stable careers, stable relationships, stable identities, stable beliefs about who we are and where we belong in the world. We construct mental frameworks that give us the feeling that life is under control. And for a while, it seems to work. A young person looks in the mirror and assumes that their body will remain strong and energetic for many years. Someone in love imagines that the emotional warmth they feel today will continue forever. A professional reaches a certain level of success and quietly believes that their position in the world has become secure. But beneath the surface, reality is quietly shifting. The body continues aging. Feelings evolve. Circumstances change. The structures we rely on slowly move beneath our feet like tectonic plates. Yet, because these changes happen gradually, the mind maintains the illusion of stability for as long as possible. Then suddenly, something happens that cracks the illusion. A wrinkle appears in the mirror. A relationship ends. A job disappears. A loved one becomes ill. A moment arrives when the mind is forced to confront a truth it has always tried to ignore. Nothing is truly fixed. This moment can feel deeply unsettling because it threatens something even more fragile than our possessions or circumstances. It threatens the sense of self we have built around them. Most people do not simply have a career, they become that career. They do not simply experience relationships, they build their identity around being a partner, a parent, a friend. They do not simply have a body, they believe the body defines who they are. So when these things begin to shift or decay, it feels as though the ground beneath the self is collapsing. The mind interprets change as loss. And loss feels dangerous. But there is another powerful force that intensifies this fear: the culture we live in. Modern society constantly reinforces the fantasy of permanence. We are surrounded by messages that promise stability, youth, and control if only we try hard enough. Advertisements tell us we can delay aging. Social media presents carefully curated images of perfect, unchanging lives. Productivity culture suggests that if we organize ourselves correctly, we can design a life that runs smoothly forever. Even success is often framed as a kind of permanent arrival point. As if reaching the right level of wealth, recognition, or security will finally protect us from the unpredictable nature of life. But none of these promises can truly be kept. No matter how advanced our technology becomes, the human body still ages. No matter how carefully we plan our lives, unexpected events still occur. No matter how deeply we love someone, the relationship will inevitably change over time. Yet instead of acknowledging this reality openly, many societies encourage us to push the thought away. We avoid talking about death. We hide aging behind cosmetics and filters. We measure success by how well we appear to control the future. The result is that many people reach adulthood having developed a very fragile relationship with reality. They expect life to remain stable. They expect happiness to be preserved once it is achieved. And when change inevitably arrives, it feels like a personal failure. But impermanence is not a personal failure. It is the very structure of existence. The tragedy is not that things change. The tragedy is that we spend so much of our lives pretending they will not. This denial creates a subtle tension that runs quietly through the human experience. It shows up as anxiety about the future, regret about the past, and an endless effort to secure what cannot truly be secured. Think about how often the mind worries about losing something: losing health, losing status, losing relationships, losing opportunities. Even when things are going well, a small voice in the background asks, "How long will this last?" This constant mental negotiation with impermanence drains enormous energy from our lives. The mind becomes like a guard standing watch over a fortress that is slowly dissolving. It tries to protect everything it values from the natural flow of time. But time cannot be stopped. Change cannot be negotiated with. The more we try to resist it, the more exhausting life becomes. Ironically, this resistance also makes happiness incredibly fragile. If our joy depends on things staying exactly as they are, then every small shift becomes a threat. A change in circumstances, a misunderstanding in a relationship, a shift in the body, each one feels like the beginning of collapse. But life was never designed to remain frozen. It was designed to move. And this movement includes growth, transformation, decay, and renewal. These are not separate events. They are different expressions of the same process. A flower blooms because a seed decayed in the soil. A forest grows because fallen trees return nutrients to the earth. A human being matures because earlier versions of themselves gradually disappear. Decay is not the enemy of life. It is one of its essential ingredients. Yet the human mind, conditioned to chase permanence, often sees only the surface of this process. It sees wrinkles instead of wisdom, endings instead of transitions, loss instead of transformation. And because of this misunderstanding, impermanence feels like something dark and threatening. But what if the fear itself is based on an incomplete view of reality? What if the very thing we call decay is quietly making life possible in every moment? If we look more carefully, beyond the instinctive fear of loss, we begin to notice something remarkable. Change is not only dissolving things. It is also constantly creating new possibilities. The same impermanence that causes pain also allows healing. The same impermanence that ends one chapter opens the door to another. And when this deeper dimension of change becomes visible, the entire meaning of decay begins to shift. What once looked like destruction may actually contain a hidden gift. If we pause for a moment and look beyond our instinctive fear, something remarkable begins to appear. The same impermanence that seems to threaten our sense of security is also quietly sustaining life in every possible way. What we call decay is not simply an ending. It is a transformation that makes every new beginning possible. Think about the natural world. In autumn, the leaves begin to fall from the trees. Their colors deepen into brilliant shades of gold, crimson, and amber before they finally detach and drift toward the ground. To the human mind, this can look like decline, the slow dying of something beautiful. But beneath the surface, a different process is unfolding. Those fallen leaves will break down, return nutrients to the soil, and nourish the roots that will produce new leaves in the spring. Without the decay of autumn, the renewal of spring could never happen. This quiet cycle exists everywhere in nature. Forests regenerate because old trees eventually collapse and make space for young ones. Rivers reshape landscapes through constant erosion and movement. Even stars in the vastness of the universe explode and dissolve, scattering the elements that eventually form new planets and new life. Decay is not separate from creation. It is the very mechanism through which creation continues. Yet when this same principle appears in our personal lives, we often struggle to recognize it. When something ends, the mind sees only the loss. It focuses on what is disappearing rather than what is becoming possible. A relationship ends, and the heart feels broken. A career path collapses, and the future feels uncertain. A difficult chapter of life dissolves, and we feel disoriented. In these moments, the mind naturally asks, "Why is this happening to me?" But if we step back and observe life over a longer arc, a different pattern begins to emerge. Many of the most important transformations in our lives were made possible by the ending of something that once felt permanent. The version of yourself that existed 10 years ago had to dissolve in order for the person you are today to appear. The beliefs you once held had to be questioned or abandoned in order for deeper understanding to grow. Even painful experiences often become the soil from which compassion, resilience, and wisdom eventually emerge. The truth is that growth is impossible without decay. Every stage of life replaces the previous one. Childhood disappears to make room for adulthood. Old identities fade so that new perspectives can arise. The self we once believed we were slowly dissolves, moment by moment, allowing us to evolve into something more complex and aware. In this sense, impermanence is not merely something we must tolerate. It is the engine of transformation. In the teachings of Buddhism, seeing impermanence clearly is considered one of the most powerful forms of wisdom. Not because it encourages despair, but because it reveals how fragile our attachments truly are. When we believe something will last forever, we cling to it tightly. We grasp it with a kind of desperation. But when we understand that everything is temporary, something subtle begins to shift inside us. We start to hold things more gently. Instead of gripping life as if it were a possession, we begin to experience it as a flow. Moments are no longer objects to be captured and preserved. They are experiences to be felt fully as they pass through us. This shift does not make life less meaningful. In fact, it makes life far more vivid. Imagine listening to a piece of music that never ended. The melody would eventually lose its beauty because it would no longer feel precious. The power of music comes from the fact that every note arises, resonates for a moment, and then fades away. The same is true for every experience in our lives. A conversation with a friend feels meaningful because it will eventually end. A sunset feels breathtaking because we know it will fade into night. Even laughter carries a sweetness because it arises briefly and then dissolves. Impermanence does not rob life of meaning. It gives life its intensity. Without change, nothing would ever feel precious. Without endings, nothing would ever feel urgent or alive. Every experience would stretch into an endless, unchanging sameness. But because everything is passing, every moment becomes unique. This is the hidden gift inside decay. The very fact that things cannot last forever is what makes them deeply valuable right now. When we truly understand this, not just intellectually, but emotionally, the way we move through the world begins to soften. We stop demanding that experiences remain exactly as they are. We stop expecting relationships to freeze in time. We stop trying to preserve versions of ourselves that no longer belong to the present moment. Instead, we begin to participate in the natural rhythm of life. We allow things to arrive. We allow them to change. And when their time comes, we allow them to pass. This does not mean we stop caring. Quite the opposite. When we understand that everything is temporary, our appreciation deepens. A simple walk becomes more beautiful when we realize we will never walk through that exact moment again. A conversation becomes more meaningful when we understand that time with another person is always limited. Even ordinary experiences, breathing, listening, sitting quietly, take on a new richness when we recognize their fleeting nature. Impermanence sharpens awareness. It invites us to wake up from the illusion that life is something we can postpone. So many people live as if the present moment were merely preparation for a future that will finally bring happiness. They rush through their days believing that fulfillment exists somewhere ahead. But impermanence quietly reveals the truth. The future they are waiting for will eventually dissolve just like the present. The only moment life ever truly offers is this one. And this moment is already changing. When we stop resisting this fact, something extraordinary begins to happen. The fear of decay slowly transforms into a deeper understanding of how life actually works. We begin to see that every ending contains the seed of a new beginning. Every loss clears space for something that could not exist before. Every fading moment gives birth to the next. Life is not collapsing around us. It is unfolding. And the process that once looked like destruction begins to reveal itself as something far more profound. A continuous dance of appearance and disappearance, where nothing is truly wasted and everything participates in the endless renewal of existence. What we once called decay may actually be one of the greatest gifts life has to offer. But there is an even more surprising discovery waiting beyond this realization. Because when we truly accept impermanence, not just as a concept, but as the living nature of reality, it does something unexpected to the human heart. It does not make us cold or detached. Instead, it opens the door to a form of joy that is deeper, freer, and more alive than anything we could experience while trying to hold the world still. At first, the idea of impermanence can feel heavy. When we begin to see clearly that everything is changing, our bodies, our relationships, our circumstances, it can seem as if life is slowly taking things away from us. The mind instinctively asks, if nothing lasts, how can there be real happiness? But this question contains a hidden misunderstanding. We assume that happiness depends on permanence. We believe joy must come from securing something stable, something that can be held, protected, and preserved. Yet if we look carefully at our own experience, we begin to see that many of our most beautiful moments were never permanent at all. A burst of laughter with a friend. A quiet evening when the sky turns deep orange as the sun disappears. A moment when music moves through you and for a few seconds, the entire world feels alive. None of these moments last very long. And yet they are among the most meaningful experiences in our lives. In fact, their very impermanence is what gives them their power. When something is fleeting, we feel it more deeply. The mind becomes alert. Attention sharpens. The present moment suddenly feels vivid, almost luminous, because we intuitively sense that it cannot be repeated in exactly the same way again. This is where a very different kind of joy begins to emerge. It is not the fragile happiness that depends on controlling life. It is not the anxious pleasure that constantly worries about losing what it has gained. Instead, it is a kind of openness to experience itself, a willingness to fully participate in life as it unfolds. This is what we might call radical joy. Radical joy does not arise from holding on to the world. It arises from finally relaxing the grip. Most of the tension in our lives comes from the endless effort to secure things that cannot truly be secured. We cling to moments that are already passing. We attempt to preserve identities that are already evolving. We try to freeze relationships, emotions, and circumstances as if life were a photograph rather than a flowing river. But when we begin to understand impermanence deeply, the compulsion to control everything slowly softens. We realize that life was never meant to be possessed. It was meant to be experienced. This shift can feel surprisingly liberating. Instead of struggling to make every moment permanent, we allow moments to come and go. Instead of clinging to pleasant experiences, we enjoy them fully while they are here. Instead of resisting change, we begin to move with it. And something remarkable happens when the mind stops fighting reality. Space appears. The constant background tension, the subtle fear that things might change, begins to dissolve. In its place arises a lighter, more fluid way of living. Imagine standing beside the ocean. If you tried to stop the waves from rising and falling, the experience would quickly become exhausting. Every surge of water would feel like a problem to be solved. But if you simply watch the waves, allowing them to rise and fall naturally, the ocean becomes mesmerizing. Life works in much the same way. When we stop demanding that each moment behave exactly as we want, we begin to see the beauty in its natural movement. Joy appears not because everything is perfect, but because we are no longer at war with change. This does not mean becoming indifferent to the world. Sometimes people misunderstand non-attachment as a form of emotional distance, as if accepting impermanence requires us to care less about life. But the opposite is true. When we stop trying to possess things, we become capable of loving them more freely. Think about holding a small bird in your hands. If you grip it tightly, trying to guarantee that it will never leave, you will harm it. But if you hold it gently, allowing it the freedom to fly away when it must, the moment of connection becomes far more beautiful. This is the spirit of non-attachment. It is not the absence of love. It is love without the need to control. When we understand that people, experiences, and moments cannot be kept forever, we stop treating them like possessions. Instead, we meet them with appreciation while they are here. A conversation becomes richer when we know it is temporary. Time with a loved one becomes more meaningful when we recognize that it is limited. Even ordinary moments, a shared meal, a walk under the sky, the sound of rain, begin to feel quietly precious. Impermanence sharpens our awareness of life. Without it, we might drift endlessly through our days, assuming there will always be more time. But the knowledge that moments pass awakens us. It invites us to pay attention now rather than later. And in this attentiveness, joy begins to appear in places we once overlooked. We notice the warmth of sunlight on the skin, the rhythm of breathing, the subtle beauty of a quiet morning. These small experiences were always present, but the restless mind often ignored them while chasing some imagined future where happiness would finally arrive. Impermanence gently dissolves that illusion. When we realize that every future moment will eventually pass just like this one, the urgency to postpone living begins to fade. The present moment is no longer a stepping stone towards something else. It becomes the very place where life is happening. And in that realization, a deep kind of gratitude begins to grow. not the gratitude that appears only when everything goes well, but a quieter appreciation for the simple fact of being alive in a constantly changing world. Even difficulties start to look different through this lens. Painful experiences are no longer permanent prisons. We remember that they too will pass. Emotions rise, peak, and dissolve. Circumstances shift. The same impermanence that allows joy to fade also allows suffering to transform. Nothing remains fixed long enough to define us forever. This understanding gives the heart a strange and beautiful courage. It allows us to face life without the constant fear of losing everything, because we have already accepted that change is part of the journey. And paradoxically, this acceptance makes life feel more vibrant, not less. When we stop clinging to permanence, the world becomes lighter. Moments flow more naturally. Relationships become less burdened by expectation. Even our sense of self begins to feel less rigid, more open to growth and transformation. Joy, in this sense, is no longer something we chase. It becomes something that arises naturally when we are fully present with the ever-changing dance of existence. And this is the deeper promise hidden inside the truth of impermanence. The moment we stop trying to hold life still, we discover that life was never trying to escape us. It was simply moving. And when we finally allow ourselves to move with it, something extraordinary begins to unfold, a freedom that cannot be destroyed by change, because it is built upon the understanding of change itself. But to truly live this freedom, we must bring the wisdom of impermanence out of philosophy and into the ordinary moments of our daily lives. Understanding impermanence intellectually is one thing, but allowing that understanding to quietly reshape the way we live each day is something far deeper. Many people can agree, at least in theory, that everything changes. It is easy to nod along with the idea that life is temporary. But wisdom begins only when this truth stops being an abstract concept and becomes a lens through which we actually see the world. The shift does not require dramatic transformation. It begins in very small moments. Right now, as you sit here listening, notice your breath. A single inhale enters the body, pauses briefly, and then disappears as the exhale flows out. The breath you just experienced will never return in exactly the same way again. Each breath is unique, appearing once and then dissolving forever. The same is true for every sensation moving through your body. The warmth of the air on your skin, the sounds in the distance, the subtle movements of thought in the mind. Each experience arises, lingers for a moment, and then quietly fades. When we begin to observe life at this level, impermanence stops being a philosophical idea. It becomes something immediate and alive. And strangely, the more clearly we see this constant change, the less frightened we become by it. Instead of trying to resist the movement of life, we begin to develop a kind of quiet trust in its rhythm. Emotions come and go. Difficult days pass. Even intense pain eventually transforms into something else. Think about the many storms you have already lived through. Moments that once felt overwhelming may now exist only as distant memories. Feelings that seemed permanent eventually softened or disappeared. Circumstances that once looked like endings later revealed themselves as transitions. Impermanence has been working in your life all along. Not only during moments of joy, but also during moments of struggle. The same process that allows happiness to fade also allows suffering to change and dissolve. This is one of the most compassionate aspects of reality. Nothing stays fixed long enough to trap us forever. When we remember this during difficult times, something inside us relaxes. Instead of panicking, we begin to observe the experience with a little more patience. We understand that even the most intense emotions are temporary visitors passing through the mind. This too will change. Those 4 simple words can transform the way we face challenges. They do not deny the reality of pain, but they remind us that pain is not the entire story. Every experience exists within the larger flow of change. But the wisdom of impermanence does not apply only to suffering. It also transforms the way we experience beauty and happiness. When a joyful moment appears, our usual habit is to cling to it. We want to freeze it, preserve it, make sure it never disappears. Ironically, that grasping often prevents us from fully enjoying the moment itself. The mind becomes busy trying to protect the experience instead of simply living it. But when we understand impermanence, our relationship with joy becomes lighter. Instead of clinging, we appreciate. We savor the moment while it is here, knowing it will eventually pass. This awareness does not make the experience sad. On the contrary, it makes the experience richer. A shared meal with family becomes more meaningful when we recognize how rare and fleeting such gatherings truly are. A walk under the sky becomes more vivid when we understand that we will never encounter that exact combination of light, wind, and sound again. Even the simplest moments begin to glow with quiet significance. Impermanence teaches us to stop postponing life. So often, people live as if the real experience of life will begin later. Later, when the schedule is less busy. Later, when the career is stable. Later, when circumstances are finally perfect. But impermanence gently reminds us that later is never guaranteed. The future we imagine is also part of the same flowing river of change. It will arrive briefly and then disappear, just like every moment before it. The only place life truly happens is here. Now. And this realization can transform how we move through the world. It encourages us to speak more kindly, because opportunities for connection are temporary. It invites us to forgive more easily, because time is precious. It inspires us to appreciate ordinary days instead of constantly chasing extraordinary ones. Impermanence also softens our sense of identity. When we recognize that everything is changing, including our thoughts, emotions, and beliefs, we stop defining ourselves so rigidly. The person we were yesterday is not exactly the person we are today. The stories we once believed about ourselves can evolve. This flexibility opens the door to growth. We are not fixed characters trapped inside permanent roles. We are dynamic processes unfolding through time. Each moment offers the possibility of learning, transforming, and seeing more clearly. And as this understanding deepens, another quiet quality begins to emerge: compassion. When we truly see that every person is moving through the same fragile, changing reality, it becomes easier to treat others with kindness. Everyone is facing the uncertainty of time. Everyone is navigating loss, transformation, and the inevitability of change. Behind every face is someone experiencing the same impermanent journey. This recognition softens the heart. Instead of competing with others for control over life, we begin to feel a sense of shared humanity. We are all travelers passing through the same flowing landscape of time. And perhaps this is one of the most beautiful consequences of understanding impermanence. It does not isolate us from life, it connects us more deeply to it. Because when we stop trying to freeze the world into permanent forms, we finally begin to participate in its living movement. We breathe with the rhythm of change. We appreciate moments as they appear. We release them when they pass. Life becomes less like a possession and more like a dance. Moments arise, shimmer briefly, and dissolve into the next. Experiences bloom and fade like flowers in a vast and ever-changing garden. Nothing stays exactly the same, yet everything contributes to the unfolding beauty of the whole. And when we see this clearly, the truth of impermanence no longer feels like something to fear. It feels like a gift. Because it is impermanence that makes every sunrise unique. Impermanence that allows pain to heal. Impermanence that gives each moment its fragile brilliance. If life were frozen, nothing would ever truly live. But because everything is changing, every moment carries the possibility of wonder. And perhaps the deepest wisdom we can learn is not to resist this truth, but to move gracefully within it, to meet life exactly as it is, moment after moment, with open eyes and an open heart. The river of existence will continue flowing whether we cling to the banks or step into the current. But when we finally let go and allow ourselves to move with the flow, we discover something quietly extraordinary. The changing nature of life was never the enemy. It was the very thing that made life precious all along.